Welcome back to part 2 of a 4-part episode on how I ranked first on the UK Bar Exam. Part 1 covered the Centralised exams, which was civil, crime and ethics. Now in this episode we're going to look at the Advocacy Exams, which are Submission Advocacy, Examination in Chief and Cross-Examination. Guys, it's nice to have you back on the channel. If you're new here, my name's Taz and I'm a barrister based in the UK, and on this channel we overcome the challenges facing law students and explore the nature of our minds through materials, supplements and practices to create happy, healthy and optimized mental well-being. Before we get into it, I'm really excited to announce the launch of my new website, and on there you'll find a bar course pack that I've put together, which includes all the materials that I use to prepare for the exams. So much is in that pack, honestly, go and check it out. And on top of that, guys, I am launching my new newsletter, which is called The Courtyard, where I'll be sharing exclusive content, my ideas, so many other things, so make sure to subscribe. Let's start off with the 10 golden rules for advocacy. Number 1, experiment in the start. If you've not done advocacy before, you don't know what your style is, so go out there, try out some new things and find what works best for you. Number 2, everything should be done within a structure. What do I mean? I mean, your skeleton arguments should have all the headings in there. When you're delivering your submissions, you should be signposting to those headings to make it easier for the person who's hearing your submissions to actually guide them through that skeleton. It makes that persuasiveness so much more attractive and powerful because they're not having to scramble through things. They know where they're going because you're guiding them there. Number 3 is that all your propositions or arguments, whatever you want to call them, should be supported by one of these 3 things: evidence, authority such as legislation, or straight up common sense. Number 4, do some breath work before you perform. So clear your lungs out, clear your throat out, and then I just have a little sip of water just to get everything nice and oiled up, ready to go. Number 5 is be authentic when you're advocating, which means be yourself. Don't try and be someone that you're not. It will just show clear as day. Number 6 is use your voice. So avoid being monotone. What is monotone? It's essentially where you're speaking like this. I have 3 submissions to put before the court today. Number 1, number 2, number 3. You know, as an advocate, your voice is your greatest weapon. Use it to be persuasive. Choose the words that you're going to emphasize and focus on tonality throughout. Number 7 is monitor your volume. Don't be too loud and don't be too quiet. There's a nice sweet spot in the middle, and just make sure that when you're delivering your submissions, people can hear you. Number 8 is maintain eye contact with the judge when you're delivering your submissions. That's not to say be a weirdo and stare at them like this. It's just, you know, don't cross the line, keep it cool, but yeah, keep it there. Number 9 and number 10 are the 2 most important ones. That's why I've left them to the end. So number 9 is take a pen drive or a USB, whatever you want to call it, into your advocacy sessions and take those recordings home. Why? Because you need to critique yourself. You need to look honestly at your performance and see what habits do you have, if any, that you need to get rid of before the final exam. Finally, number 10, we are back with the log. Create a log of all the feedback that you get. Why? Because you're going to come back to that later. Moving on to the Cardinal Sins. The first is so basic. You need to be in court attire. You're going to get marked down if you're not, so come on, we can't be getting this one wrong. The next one is never say I think or I believe. It's always I submit. Next is referring to the parties inconsistently. So at one moment you might say the claimant or the respondent, then you're saying Miss Jackson. It needs to be consistent. Make sure you're addressing the court correctly. You need to know what court is it and what status is the judge to get the titles right. Don't make the mistake of not rehearsing your submissions. This is a performance. An actor doesn't go on set without knowing his lines. The same should apply for you. Don't be glued to the script. This is easier said than done. In the beginning, it's okay to be guided by the script, but as you progress through the SGSs, begin to come away from it and just deal with the questions in the moment. And once you know your submissions off by heart, you'll be more comfortable being present. Finally, know the BSB's definition of a fatal flaw and avoid it at all costs. In terms of your revision for all your advocacy modules, hopefully your institution would have provided you with a manual like this. This is the BPP Advocacy Manual, and it takes you through everything you need to know, the nuts and bolts for each submission, cross and examination in chief. Advocacy is all practice, so don't skip the SGSs. Let's start off with submission advocacy. This is all about making an application to the court for them to find in your favor. Now, there's loads of different types of applications, but the essential structure is the same. I recommend you need 2 documents. Number 1 is a script. And number 2 is the actual official skeleton argument which you're going to present. They say you don't need a script. Honestly, that is absolute nonsense. If you are unfamiliar to the legal world of the bar, and you haven't communicated with a judge before and you haven't done mooting, there's a lot of terminology and phrases that you need to be saying. So having the script there as a support is very useful to know how to address the parties, outline the legal tests, and just the terminology you're going to be using to present your submissions. Now let's go through the skeleton. I'm going to put an example up here so you have a rough idea of what we're talking about. The first thing is the introduction. This is essentially outlining what it is that you're applying for and referencing the law to support that application. Next is factual background. So this is what it says on the tin. You just deliver the facts to the court. Normally, you won't be asked to deliver this in the exam. Why? Because it eats up too much time and it stops you from getting on deep into your submissions anyway. However, if you are asked to deliver the facts, remember this, it's not persuasive advocacy. You're not trying to persuade the tribunal of anything. You're applying functional advocacy, which is delivering the facts in an objective way, following a chronology. Next is the documents you relied on. I would separate this out according to headings. Normally it's exhibits, and then you'll have the cases and legislation you've used. Remember with exhibits that you want to be name dropping the surname of the witness along with the page of the specific reference. Next, you want to move on to the legal tests. So you want to outline any legislation, and then you include the legal test according to its limbs. So if there's 3 parts to that test, it's 1, 2, 3. The next section is the issues. What are the issues in the case? What are the controversies on the facts that's preventing you from succeeding in your application? Penultimate section is your submissions. Normally, if there's a legal test, you will organize your propositions, your submissions, your arguments, whatever you want to call them, in accordance with the limbs of that legal test. If there isn't a legal test, then you will order them in accordance with what are the strongest arguments that you can make on the facts. When making your submissions, I would recommend follow the PEE method. That's point, evidence, explain. You make the point, you provide the evidence, which will normally reference the exhibit, a page of the exhibit which supports the point that you're making. And then you explain, why is this relevant? How does this support the argument that you're making? Finally, you conclude, and then don't forget to sign off. I would just keep it simple, your name, the date, and chambers. Before each of your advocacy exams, get your log, look at all the feedback you were given and go through that, make a mental note, because it's really important to have that at the forefront before you walk into your exam. Prepare a judicial intervention sheet, which is a series of rebuttals for all the highlighted weaknesses in your case. That wraps up submission advocacy nicely, so we can move into witness handling, which includes examination in chief and cross-examination. But before we go into them separately, I just want to outline the rules, procedures, and techniques for examination in chief and cross-examination. The most fundamental rule in witness handling is always ensure you maintain control over your witness. You should only ask 1 question at a time. Don't load questions with 2 or 3 questions within a question. Honestly, it's bad practice. You need to appreciate the different styles of questions for cross and examination in chief. I should say the different types of questions. And these are first leading, where you're suggesting the answer in the question that you're asking. Non-leading, where you're not doing that. Closed questions normally try and elicit a binary response, yes or no. And then open questions leave it to the discretion of the person answering the question how they want to respond. For examination in chief and cross-examination, I would really recommend creating formal procedures templates for all the different witness handling techniques that might come up in the exam. This could be anything from telling a witness to raise their voice, to refreshing a witness's memory, to avoiding inadmissible evidence, to cross-examining on previous inconsistent statements. Whatever they are, you've got them on a piece of paper there. Should they come up, you just take it and no need to worry because it's all right there. For cross and examination in chief, you'll need to do pre-trial preparation, and that's because going into a trial, an advocate should have a very clear understanding of what their case is about and exactly how they're going to go about getting the result that they're looking for. The pre-trial preparation can be broken down into 3 areas. You have the case analysis, then you have the case theory, and then you end with the trial preparation. Let's take each of those in turn. So with the case analysis, this is all about you actually reading the brief and digesting what the facts are, because this is going to inform your case theory. The case theory is your understanding as an advocate of what this case is all about and how you're going to sell this to the jury, for them to find in your favor. Practical steps for you to prepare your case analysis and case theory begin first by reading the brief, then reduce the entire case into short propositions, if accepted, would allow you to reach the verdict you're looking for. This essentially is your case theory. Once you've got those propositions, then look at the facts in the brief for and against those propositions. Then once you've got all that information, review your case theory on the basis of the facts that you have. Finally, review those propositions. Not only make sure that they're in line with your instructions, but they're also in line with the law. The third and final section is the trial preparation, and this is about how you are going to go about managing the witness in trial to elicit the evidence that you need. Practical steps for preparing your trial strategy. I would produce a grid outlining what are the propositions of your case theory. The next column is the evidence for that proposition. After that, the other column is what's the counter evidence against that proposition, ending with the final column, which is how are you going to present this evidence at trial. With procedures out the way, let's get into examination in chief. The main aim of examination in chief is, as an advocate, to elicit evidence from a witness that establishes your case. You need to find the balance in terms of controlling your witness. Why? Because you want the evidence to be presented in a very clear and logical way, and controlling the witness helps to do that. But equally, you want the witness to persuade the tribunal, and they do that by speaking in their own voice, but the more you control them, the less they're able to speak freely. For examination in chief, you mainly want to be asking non-leading questions. However, there is an exception to this prohibition on leading questions, which is you're expected, it's good practice to lead on things which are not in dispute, facts which the other side has no problem with. Let's get into exam preparation. So normally you'll be given the brief a week before your exam. Now, at that point, do your pre-trial preparation. Why? Because this is going to influence the questions that you're going to be asking your witnesses. The key to examination in chief is organize your questions around a series of events that has a logical and chronological flow to them. You want the witness to take you through a smooth, clean, uninterrupted chronology of the events. And as the advocate, to do that, to gain that from them, you have to pull out any of the issues in the case and put them either side of that timeline, such as the lighting or whatever it may be, to ensure that the timeline remains uninterrupted when you begin questioning the witness. You need to see it as clearing the runway for them to take off. When preparing your questions, remember, they are non-leading questions. So it's who, what, when, where, why, how. All of these allow the witness to describe it in their own words. Finally, for exam technique, I'm going to discuss the techniques in the manual, and then I'm going to give you my advice. So for examination in chief, there's piggybacking, which is essentially you piggybacking off one of the witnesses' response to your question to ask them another question. And then you've got insulating a witness. What this is think of the timeline of a trial. You've got examination in chief followed by cross-examination. So if you know in your case, in your brief, there's a weakness in the witness's case or the evidence, it's better as the advocate, let's say you're the prosecution, to give the witness a chance to explain that in their own words in examination in chief, rather than the first time the jury see this evidence, it's coming off the back of counsel cross-examining them, painting their version of events. When you'd use these techniques, you'd use piggybacking to regain control of a witness, and you'd insulate a witness when you know that they have a reason for a piece of potential controversial evidence that might come up in cross. I scored 84 on the examination in chief exam, so my best advice for you would be this. When you're drafting the questions, put yourself in the place of that witness, in the mind of the witness. Where are they in the scene? How many more questions do you need to ask before you can ask the next question, before you can ask the question which gets them round the corner where the event took place? And if you do that incrementally, you'll have an extremely clear, clean-cut examination in chief. Don't let the first time you're trying a technique be the exam, and try and avoid high-risk techniques. It's best to play it safe in the exam. Finally, for last-minute instructions, take 2 different colored pens in. I recommend green and red. And depending on what the last minute instructions are, green adds in new questions to the questions that you're going to ask your witness, and red crosses out questions that you've already prepared to ask. Now let's talk about cross-examination, which is the final or maybe the first advocacy exam you do, depending on your institution. With cross, the first thing to note, the most important thing to have in the forefront of your mind is this: what's the purpose of cross? And it's twofold. First, it's to convey and persuade the tribunal of your case. And then the second is that you are seeking to discredit the evidence presented by the opposing side's witnesses. Unlike examination in chief, where you're asking non-leading questions, cross is the opposite. You are predominantly asking leading questions. Examples of leading questions are like these. You were drinking that night, weren't you? Isn't it correct that you left the premises at 6 p.m? Surely you're mistaken. Those style of questions where you are bouncing your case off the witness like a tennis ball. There's two fundamental rules to cross-examination. The first is that you need to put your case to a witness. And that means any evidence that you rely on in your case, you need to give the witness a chance to provide their explanation as to why it might be that they were at the scene of the crime, or whatever it may be. They have the right to give their version of events. The second is pitching your case. This will come through your case analysis and your case theory, but it's your decision to decide what's the best narrative to present the jury to secure a favorable verdict. An example being, based on the facts, is the witness likely to be honestly mistaken, or are they flat out lying? Now, get this wrong and this could completely shoot your credibility when you're doing cross-examination. It's important to pitch it just right. Moving on to exam preparation. Like an examination in chief, the first thing to do is your pre-trial preparation. The key to cross-examination is the moment you get that brief is deciding on what are the strongest conclusions that I can make in this case. And once you have those conclusions, then it's all about drafting questions which secure as much agreement as possible from the witness until you get to that conclusion where they can't say no. And even if they do, they're not going to be believed by the jury anyway. In a nutshell, it's agreement, 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 and then you drop that conclusion on them like a hammer. In terms of exam technique, there are loads of different techniques the manual refers to. I'll go through them quickly one by one. The first is asking non-leading questions. This, in my opinion, is high risk. It's essentially used to trap a witness by allowing them to embellish their evidence. You've got boiling the frog, which is agreement, 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 big strong conclusion. The name comes from turning the heat up on the frog so slightly that it doesn't even notice it's boiling by the end. Shutting down escape routes. This is where a witness might have a way of getting out of something, but if you ask them a question which you know shuts that escape route down, so later when you ask the question, they've got no way of getting out of it. And then you've got cross-examining on previous convictions, you've got cross-examining on an inconsistent statement or a previous inconsistent statement. And all of these, as I've said previously, have something for them in your formal procedures template. The best pieces of advice I can give for this exam are these. Number one, have contingency questions. What does that mean? It means if you're trying to get to a conclusion using a chain of questions, if you hit a brick wall with one of those questions, you need to have other questions to be able to go around and get to the conclusion you're trying to get to. I remember in one of my exams, I put up a question, it got stonewalled and the whole conclusion fell through. So don't let that be you. Don't get a witness's backup from the beginning, and you do that by asking sharp questions that you're probably not going to get agreement on. There needs to be a spectrum of how likely it is that you're going to get agreement, and save the sharp ones till the very end of the cross-examination. Rehearse your submissions. You need to get the timing down for them. You don't want to be asking 50 questions in cross and you never even get out of the first topic. So you need to time everything for all of them. And finally, please read the mark schemes for each of them. They will differ, and it's important to know going in, how's this work? What am I getting assessed on? And that way you can ensure that you are hitting each of those sections to secure maximum grades. Other than that, guys, you know what it is. I'll see you at the next one.